Hi, I'm Joy McCullough, and I am a fourth-year Pitch Wars mentor. I wanted to do a couple videos because I'm not doing any of the live chats, and so I was getting a couple questions about how to tell whether or not your manuscript is middle grade or YA. I write both, and I read both, and so I decided to do a video about that. So I'm going to talk about three things in determining whether your manuscript is middle grade or YA. And they have to do with the main character's age, they have to do with the content in your manuscript, and they have to do with the voice. And it's always going to come back to the voice. So the best way to be able to tell whether or not a manuscript is middle grade or YA, regardless of the content, regardless of the main character's age, is to read a lot of middle grade and YA. And by doing that, you'll be able to get the feel for what is a middle grade novel and what is a young adult novel. But I wanted to talk about age first. Typically, middle grade novels tend to have main characters that are between 10 and 13. However, there are adult novels that have 10-year-old main characters, but they're adult novels because of the content and the voice. 13 is also a sort of a gray area and a tricky area because it's usually considered too young for YA, but editors can also be weird about taking it on for middle grade. That's why the vast majority of the middle grade you see, the main characters are 10, 11, or 12. But I had a couple examples to show you the difference. Lauren Miracle has a wonderful series of middle grade books called The Winnie Years. The first one is 10, then there's one called 11, there's one called 12. This one is called 13, and the main character is 13. It takes place over the whole year that she's 13. And it is very clearly a middle grade book. This book, I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, is a dual perspective YA novel. And one of the perspectives, the character is 13. But it's very clearly YA. So I want to read you the first couple paragraphs of each of them so that you hear the difference in a 13-year-old YA voice and a 13-year-old middle grade voice. So starting with Jandy Nelson and showing you that my book is signed and she's so cool. So this character is 13. This is how it all begins, with Zephyr and Fry reigning neighborhood sociopaths torpedoing after me and the whole forest floor shaking under my feet as I blast through air, trees, this white-hot panic. "You're going over, you pussy," Fry shouts. Then Zephyr's on me, has one, both of my arms behind my back, and Fry's grabbed my sketchpad. I lunge for it, but I'm armless, helpless. I try to wriggle out of Zephyr's grasp. Can't. Try to blink them into moths? No. They're still themselves, 15-foot tall, 10th grade asshats who toss living, breathing 13-year-old people like me over cliffs for kicks. 13-year-old narrator, young adult voice. Okay, Lauren Miracle, The Winnie Years, book 13. Listen for the middle grade voice. The thing about birthdays, especially if you just that very day turn 13, is that you should know in your heart of hearts that the world is your oyster. Even if you don't like oysters because of the slime factor and because they're gray and have no eyes, eating an oyster is like swallowing a fishy blob of Jell-O, and frankly, I'm not a fan. I would not, however, run away shrieking if someone dangled an oyster in front of me like my BFF Dinah would. Middle grade, 13-year-old voice. Okay, and as a third example, I just got the sample of The Sweetness at the Bottom of the Pie, which is an adult mystery novel. But the main character, the narrator, is an 11-year-old girl. They're murder mysteries, and they're definitely adult. But I'm going to read you just the first paragraph from that. "It was as black in the closet as old blood. They had shoved me in and locked the door. I breathed heavily through my nose, fighting desperately to remain calm. I tried counting to 10 on every intake of breath. and to 8 as I released each one slowly into the darkness. Luckily for me, they had pulled the gag so tightly into my open mouth that my nostrils were left unobstructed, and I was able to draw in one slow lungful after another of the stale, musty air. Okay, so adult voice, 11-year-old main character. If it were middle grade, she would not say her nostrils were left unobstructed. Okay, so voice. It always comes back to voice. There's a typical age range in middle grade, but if the voice doesn't match, it might be something else. Or you might need to do a lot more reading middle grade to make the match voice if the content of your story is middle grade. There's also been a lot of questions about, can I do this in middle grade? How dark is too dark? How heavy is too heavy? It's going to come back to the voice. There are a lot of heavier, edgier topics happening in middle grade right now, and it's how you handle it, and usually, in my opinion, whether or not the story ends with hope. A YA novel or an adult novel might not end with hope. In my opinion, if you're subbing to me, a middle grade story should always end with hope, no matter how dark the subject matter is. But you can write a middle grade novel about a child with an abusive alcoholic parent. You're going to handle it differently, and the voice is going to be different than if you write a YA novel about the same topic. But generally, personally, in my own submissions, I'm very open to darker, edgier topics as long as you're getting that middle grade voice. So when you're evaluating whether or not your book is middle grade or YA, think about the age. They're probably between 10 and 13. Very, very occasionally you'll see outliers. People will say, oh, but Percy Jackson, he's 16, and it's very distinctly middle grade voice, and that's true. But if you're not Rick Riordan, don't worry about that. So generally you're going to be in the age 10 to 13 range. Your content needs to be handled in a appropriate way, in a hopeful way. But most of all, your voice needs to be middle grade. So hopefully the examples I've given you have given a good idea of how the same age character is reflected differently from one voice to another voice. So I hope that helps. But the best thing always is going back to reading lots and lots of middle grade to see if the voice that you're writing falls in line with those books that are getting published. Thanks very much for listening.